Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight at this wonderful facility, Five Points Arts Center, right here on the outskirts of the fine city of Torrington. My name is Jacques Williams. I am the Executive Director for Culture for a Cause. Give yourselves a nice round of applause, first of all. We surely appreciate you, and we think that you're going to be in for a very, very special evening. We want to thank our host tonight, Five Points Arts Center, and their executive director, Judith McElhone. We're so delighted to be able to collaborate with this fine institution, and they always seem to know exactly where the pulse of the arts community is, and we always learn something whenever we are able to connect and work with these fine groups of individuals. The story behind 5 Points is amazing, and to this day, I hold a lot of pride in the fact that this place has come such a very long way with vision and with determination from their leader, Judith McElhone. So give her another nice round of applause. We have a slight change in the program tonight. I hope you guys don't mind, but sometimes that's the way life is. But to give our opening invocation, we're going to have Pastor Angaza Mwando come up and do that for us. Angaza?
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. We're thanking the Lord that we're able to make it. So my name is Reverend Ngaza Mwando from the Workman AME Zion Church. So let's just pray. Father, we just thank you for a gathering. Thank you, Lord, for diversity. Thank you, Lord, because you're able to help us to come together and to share moments and to educate. Open our eyes that we may see, that we will see each other, that we will grow with each other, that we will continue to be humble servants unto you, and just say, Lord, we just thank you for allowing this program to take place. Thank you for allowing the diversity, and thank you for allowing a word of knowledge to come forth. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. And we're going to have a young artist speak to you briefly here. We're so proud to be collaborating with this young group of individuals who have so much promise for the future. And as we grow and extend our reach out to the artist community, we've been very blessed to be able to work with individuals like this. So without further ado, Anaya Stevenson, would you like to come up and address the group?
Thank you, Jock. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Can we just clap one more time for ourselves for being here? Awesome. I am one of the artists outside. My artwork is some of the paintings as soon as you walk in the door, so feel free to take a look. If you have any questions, I'll be here all night tonight. Thank you so much for coming to see this film. I haven't seen it yet, but I know it's very important to the times of today and years beyond and years ago. So it's very important for us to see how the world has changed, how it hasn't changed. Excuse me, I'm a little emotional about it, but how things have changed, how things are changing. But we're all here today. Well, we might have our own ideas about it, but we're all seeing one thing. I think that's important, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you, 5 Points, again, for hosting us. Thank you, Culture for a Cause. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Anaya. Our next speaker is just a wonderful, wonderful teammate, someone who, when they gave me the call a little over a year ago, they said that they wanted to get involved with our organization. My heart just blew up because I know how passionate she is about her work, how dedicated she is to it, and also how good she is. So we wanted to take this opportunity to let you hear our proclamation for the Declaration of Human Rights. She is a representative for the Declaration, and Culture for a Cause wanted to support that through this proclamation. So the next speaker you'll be hearing is Corice Villarreal.
Thank you, Jacques. So Jacques reached out to me about several months ago and said that he was interested in me writing a proclamation for Culture for a Cause. So with my certificate and background as a human rights consultant, I decided to take this upon myself, especially since I'm so passionate about Culture for a Cause as well, and I came up with this proclamation. In the spirit of unity, equality, and dignity for all, let it be known that Culture for a Cause stands as a beacon of hope and harmony, guided by the principles enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our mission is simple: to build community through the transformative power of music and the arts. We believe that the arts has a unique ability to transcend racial and economic divides, weaving threads of connection that binds us together as one human family. As stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to freely participate in cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancements and its benefits. Culture for a Cause wholeheartedly embraces this principle, recognizing the profound impact of art in touching the hearts and souls of individuals, conveying powerful messages that resonate across boundaries. Through our commitment to creating and supporting community arts projects, we strive to foster a sense of belonging and togetherness among people from all walks of life. These projects serve as catalysts for dialogue, understanding, and collaboration, celebrating the rich tapestry of diverse cultures that make up our society. Furthermore, we dedicate ourselves to raising funds for community social safety nets through events that center around these art projects. By combining the transformative power of the arts with a passion for social justice, we aim to not only inspire creativity and connection, but also to support those in need within our communities. Be it furthermore proclaimed that we call upon individuals, organizations, and communities to join us in this mission, and to work together to create a world where creativity and compassion flourish, and where every person's human rights are recognized and respected. In witness thereof, this proclamation is made in honor and to affirm our collective commitment to these ideals on this day. Thank you.
I don't want to go any further without acknowledging our sponsors that helped us put this event together tonight. We want to give special thanks to Mel Brickman and Health Markets, Crossroads, Sports Bar and Grill, 5 Points Arts, the Northwest Connecticut Chamber of Commerce, Toth Insurance Agency, Northwest Community Bank, and Dr. Michael Curry. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the volunteers at Culture for a Cause. You guys are absolutely the best. Whenever the chips are down, you guys always step up And none of this would be possible without your dedication and commitment, and we salute you for that. We'd also like to thank the Torrington Historical Society, Gail and Mark, for all their assistance. Um, we go back quite some years, and we've seen this community coalesce around the arts, and it's wonderful to see because anytime you do anything on an organic basis, it tends to be a heavy lift. And because of community-minded people like Mark and Gail, that lifting is a lot less burdensome. So I thank you for that. And I also want to acknowledge one of our audience members tonight, and I definitely want to thank them for attendance. And he's a multi-talented individual who, whenever we get together, it's just one laugh after another. But at the end of the day, he's very serious about his artistic work and also about his work with the community. George, would you please stand up? Thank you. So at this time, it's about that time, and we're going to have a brief word from the filmmakers and producers and directors of this great piece of work. And Karen, would you like to come up? Or Doug? Which? Beauty from Before Brains, right?
You can hear me, right? Yes? So I just wanted to say that I'm so honored to be here. First of all, it's due to the wonderful Jacques Williams and also Dan Morrison, whom we met at the Ridgefield Film Festival earlier this year and started a collaboration that's been growing ever since. And my introduction tonight to this extraordinary institution, I'm literally blown away. The arts are so necessary for our well-being, our sanity, our progress, and everything that we do. And this place is just amazing in such a short time. What has been accomplished is astonishing. And that proclamation, Clarice read, is perfect fit, and we're so pleased to be proud of it because here we are, a combination of social justice and art. And I will add that I did get to work with, and had the extraordinary privilege, really, of working with James Baldwin while he was still alive for the last 2 years of his life. And this is not the project we were working on, but when he passed December 1st, 1987, we followed his lead, and this is the film we made. And so he's with us, I'm sure. He stayed on my shoulder ever since.
And with that being said, it's showtime. Oh, okay.
There are days, this is one of them, when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it. From my point of view, no label and no slogan and no party and no skin color, and indeed no religion, is more important than the human being.
Now, when you were starting out as a writer, you were a black, impoverished homosexual. You must have said to yourself, gee, how disadvantaged can I get?
Oh, no, I thought I hit the jackpot.
Oh, great.
It was so outrageous you could not go any further, you know. It had to be, so you had to find a way to use it.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home.
first met Jim when he and I and the world were young enough to believe ourselves independently salvageable. We became friends in the late 50s, just as the United States was poised to make its quantum leap into the future, just as Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and other Southerners were girding themselves for the second Civil War in 100 years, and just when Malcolm X was giving voice to the anger in the streets and in the minds of northern black city folks. In that riotous pulse of political fervor, James Baldwin and I met again and liked each other. In this particular society, we are supposed to be so contained. Men are supposed to be men, women are supposed to be women, and not really need anybody else. The ability to ask, will you be my brother? The courage to ask is often missing. James Baldwin was a brother, incredible.
He lived his life as witness. He wrote until the end. We hear of the writer's blocks of celebrated Americans, how great they are, so great indeed that their writing fingers have been turned to checks. But Jimmy wrote, he produced, he spoke, he sang. No matter the odds, he remained man and spirit and voice, ever expanding and ever more conscious. Let us hold him in our hearts and minds. Let us make him a part of our invincible black souls, the intelligence of our transcendence. Let our black hearts grow big, world-absorbing eyes like his, never closed. Let us one day be able to celebrate him like he must be celebrated if we are ever truly to be self-determining. For Jimmy was God's black revolutionary mouth, if there is a God, and revolution his righteous natural expression.
I was born in Harlem in 1924, when it was a very different place than it is now. My father came from New Orleans. My mother came from Maryland. And if they had waited, 2 more seconds, I might have been born in the South. The first house I remember was on Park Avenue, which is not the American Park Avenue, or maybe it is the American Park Avenue.
Uptown Park Avenue.
Uptown Park Avenue, where the railroad tracks are. We used to play on the roof, and I can't call it an alley, but near the river. It was a kind of dump, garbage dump. Those were the first scenes I remember. I remember my father had trouble keeping us alive. There were 9 of us, and I was the oldest, so I took care of the kids and dealt with Daddy, whom I understand much better now. Part of his problem was he couldn't feed his kids. But I was a kid, and I didn't know that. And he was very religious, very rigid. In fact, in a word, he wanted power. He wanted Negroes to do, in effect, what he imagined white people did. That is to own the houses, to own U.S. Steel. And this is what, in effect, killed him, because there was something in him which could not bend. He could only be broken. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world. But then you read. It was books that taught me that the things that tormented me the most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive or who had ever been alive. I went to the 135th Street Library at least 3 or 4 times a week. And I read everything there. I mean, every single book in that library. In some blind and instinctive way, I knew that what was happening in those books was also happening all around me. And I was trying to make a connection between the books and the life I saw and the life I lived. I knew I was black, of course, but I also knew I was smart. I didn't know how I would use my mind, or even if I could. But that was the only thing I had to use. And I was going to get whatever I wanted that way. And I was going to get my revenge that way. So I watched school where I watched the streets, because part of the answer was there.
He did a play when I was very, very small. He had to be very small himself. He could have had, must have been about 8 or 9 years old when he wrote his first play. And he also wrote the school song, which they used until the school closed down. The whole family went to this school, PS 24, on 28th Street, between 5th and Madison. And everyone had to sing this same song. If I can remember, let's see. Farewell, farewell to 24, for we shall miss you evermore. We hate to say goodbye to you, that's what we all must know. To teachers we must say goodbye, and to our friends, oh my, we grieve to say we're very sad, but going forward is a thought to make us glad. And this is something, you know, we all went through, and it's one of the things I guess that you never forget.
By the time I was 14, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And I wrote all the time. I wrote at first on paper bags. I wrote plays and poetry and stories. And writing was my great consolation.
My father was very opposed to it, very frightened by it. And that frightened me. My mother was frightened too, but my mother was another kind of person. She didn't try to stop me.
Did you think he was going to be as big a success and as important?
No, I didn't think that. But I knew that he had to write.
I got something from school today, and Mom said I should show you.
History of New York, huh?
I wrote it over and over again, and I had to read a lot of books about it.
Might have been nice if you'd written something about the Bible. Something about your own people and God.
I will next time, sir.
I'll tell you this. My father frightened me so badly, I had to fight him so hard that nobody has ever frightened me since.
And I went into the church, partly because I'd been driven there all my life. And my father had always determined that I would be a preacher. I'd always said I wouldn't be. But life outwitted me, you know, and corroborated him. Because at that point in my life, there was no place for me to go. I had no intention ever of becoming a preacher or of entering that terrifying church I spent nearly 14 years by that time trying to get out of. But I was so afraid of everything else that in a way I ended up with the devil I knew, though I couldn't have said it then.
Amen. You don't have to have no title behind your name just to go tell somebody Jesus loved you. Amen. You don't have to have a title behind your name and say Jesus saved, that Jesus delivered, that he sets free today. But you got to take what he's giving you and put it to good use. You could go to school all you want to, get all kind of DDs and PhDs and whatever else you want behind your name. But if you don't take that and put it to good use, it's worthless. Amen.
The whole question of Jimmy and religion is a knotty question. It's a difficult question. It's one that as a biographer, obviously I have to deal with, and I haven't really finished dealing with it. I think it's important to realize that rhetorically the church is extremely important to Jimmy. The language of the church, the language of the Bible primarily, the patterns of the Bible, even the struggles of the Bible.
I've been a boy preacher for 3 years. And at those 3 years, really, in a sense, you know, those 3 years in the pulpit, I didn't realize it then, that is what turned me into a writer, really. Dealing with all that anguish and that despair and that beauty for those 3 years. You know, and I left because I didn't want to cheat my congregation. I knew I didn't know anything at all. And I couldn't leave. I had left the pulpit. I had to leave home. So I left the pulpit and I left home the same day. That was quite a day. And, well, in a sense, I became a writer because I thought if I got through, my old man would be proud of me, you know. I started writing when I was very, very young. I started being published when I was about 22. And once I was out of Harlem, I began to see, well, I was a book reviewer, you know. Wrote some of the early essays in that time. But I'd written myself into a wall. I was expected to write about one subject only. So for 2 years I reviewed all those post-war Be Kind to Colored People, Be Kind to Jews books. All 47,000 of them came across my desk. And I simply had to go, you know, and try to figure out what in the world was happening to me. Negroes were not served here, Negroes cannot eat there. Well, if you were a Negro, there was nothing you could do at all. And one evening, something happened to me, which frightened me ever since. And it was simply that I walked into a restaurant where I knew I would not be served. But I walked in with the determination to be served or to die. And I waited. I wasn't served, of course. The woman said, poor little girl, said that Negroes were not served here. And I'd wanted to kill her, but I couldn't get close enough to her, so I threw a glass of water at her. And when the glass of water hit the mirror behind the bar, I woke up. It was a terrible turning point in my life. I never forgot it because it was the first time in my life that I ever wanted really to hurt anybody. That drove me finally out of the country. The best thing I ever did in my life, I think, was, in effect, flee America and go to Paris in 1948. And it gave me time to vomit up a great deal of bitterness. At least I could operate in Paris without being menaced socially. No one cared what I did.
I met Jimmy in 49 in Paris. I was 17, he was 24. We were both kids in the streets, no money. And we became friends.
Everybody was poor in Paris. Those who worked were poor. Jimmy was very poor, and he was living in a cheap hotel on the left bank. He'd move around. He loved to give parties. He loved to invite people in, and he didn't spend a lot of money on them. People would just come just to be there. And even then, when we were young, we used to break up bars and drink all night long. We would sit up at night, dance and sing and laugh until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and the neighbors would say, "We heard you, but you didn't bother us."
All our time, all our life was ours. I mean, we had no job, nothing else to do than live. And he lived, my God, he lived. Me too. We went around the streets drinking a lot already. I heard also about the complaints about that. But, you know, we could drink. We both could drink very well. Very well. I used to see him every day. We would talk, usually all night, and we were in love with each other, you know, being two young kids, both in different ways lost. I was a very lost kid, and he was certainly, but in another way, a completely different way.
He said that he came because he wanted to be a writer, and he couldn't be a writer in America. It was that simple.
It was very significant. The first thing I wrote in Paris, once I caught my breath, was everybody's protest novel. You know, to get that behind me, and to find out what I could really do. You know, if I really was a writer instead of a pamphleteer.
I think the next thing that really was impressed on me, because I had been reading some things, was Notes of a Native Son, when that book came out. It impressed me because a young black man, you know, whose picture looked like he was earnest and serious about what he was saying. And I think he was impressive on a whole generation of black people, not just writers.
I mean, he never lost sight of the fact that he was an American. He always considered himself very much an American. Even I mean, you can see that in his early essays, the Notes of a Native Son essays, in which really he is using Paris, using France as a means of discovering his own identity.
I was very lucky. First thing I realized in Paris was that you don't ever leave home. You take your home with you. You better. You know, otherwise you're homeless.
France was not without its race prejudices. It simply didn't have any guilt vis-a-vis black Americans. And black Americans who went there, from Richard Wright to Sidney Bechet, were so colorful and so talented and so marvelous and so exotic. Who wouldn't want them? Of course. But among the people they did not want in France were the Algerians. As Jimmy said, they were the niggers of France. To him, they were his brothers. He was very outspoken during the Algerian War, when they were trying to win their freedom from France in the 50s. He wrote about the Algerians in this excerpt from No Name in the Street. I had come to Paris with no money, and this meant that in those early years I lived mainly among les miserables. And in Paris, les miserables are Algerian. They scraped such sustenance as they could off the filthy, unyielding stones of Paris. The French called them lazy, but they were not lazy. They were mostly unable to find work, and their rooms were freezing. And although they spoke French, and had been, in a sense, produced by French, they were no more at home in Paris than I. James Baldwin was relentless in his insight. He knew where he was.
The problem with him was that he needed quiet. He loved the streets, but he had to get out of the streets once in a while and get off someplace where he could work. He was moving all the time to find places where he could work.
So we went to Switzerland. I had that idea to go to Switzerland, where he would have a house of his own and nothing else to do in that village. That I knew. There was nothing else. It was all snow, all mountains, so there was nothing else but just work. I mean, it's life like 10 centuries ago. Now it has changed a lot, but at that time it was a lost village, really. Nothing else but snow, mountains, a few cows, and people. It's true that we must have been a very strange couple, that's true. A very strange couple in that village. Well, what can you do? C'est la vie. He'd be writing, I would go do the shopping, I would take him out again after the work, have drinks, and have fun. It was a very strange experience, but must for the people of the village. But then that's how we learned about, you know, the first reaction of people towards a black man, and these reactions come from a whole culture. And that's in his essay, The Stranger Village. They lived all that winter, and it was a fabulous experience for him, you know, in a whole, I mean, white village, all white, the snow, the mountain, everything was white. A lot of children that he loved. The children adored him, and they loved him, and he loved the children, and we went along very well. I mean, the Jimmy, I guess he charmed them, really. We had a marvelous winter. He did his work, and how well, and that's where he finished his first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, okay?
It's true, in that chalet in the snow, I listened to Bessie Smith and to Fats Waller, and they carried me back to what I myself had been like when I was a little boy, and gave me the key to the language which gave me Go Tell It on the Mountain.
Because of the sound of the typewriter, I remember when he finished the novel, because he typed, you know, the end, you know, bing, bing, very slowly, with hitting, you know, very strongly. Then I think I came out of the kitchen, I said, ah bien, mon vieux, je crois que c'est fini. And he said, yes, it's the end. So we got out, we had a lot of drinks, okay? We got drunk, and that was it. Then we came down to the valley, put the novel on the mail, and it was published, obviously.
Well, in 1948, I was the publicity director of Knopf, Alfred Knopf, the publisher. And sounds grand, but it's $75 a week then, however. And I read a lot of magazines in the course of doing publicity. And I read these marvelous pieces by James Baldwin, first in Commentary magazine, a piece about Harlem, and then a few pieces in the New Leader, which is sort of a Trotskyite, I guess, magazine of the time, still going. And they were so wonderful, these pieces, that I went to the editor-in-chief named Harold Strauss. And I said, Harold, look at this. This is a wonderful writer. He's concise, he's powerful, he's witty, and he's saying something. And you should get after him. I wasn't doing any editing then. And Harold said, oh, thank you. And he read the pieces. He said they were very nice. He liked them very much. And he knew the woman who was Jimmy's agent then, who's also named Strauss, Helen Strauss, no relation whatsoever. And Helen said, yes, Jimmy's working on a novel, and I'll send it over to you. And eventually, Harold got this bale of manuscript in all different sized pages, and different typewriters obviously used on it over the course of the years. And he read some of it, and he called me, and he said, I don't like this kind of book, Bill. It's not a real straightforward narrative novel, you know. Would you look at it? And so I took it home, and here, this very apartment. And I read it, and I thought, my God, this is a big book. This is important. And I took it back to the office. And 2 other editors read it and agreed with me, said it was a wonderful book. And we did it.
And I think this is an autobiographical novel. You know, he wrote these confessionals. He wrote a lot of autobiographical work, explaining what it is to grow up in Harlem. I'm going to give an example of this. Excellent scene here and notice the detail and the economy of this passage, okay? And this is Sunday morning in church. Okay, now get this. The sisters in white, heads raised. The brothers in blue, heads back. The white caps of the women seeming to glow in the charged air like crowns. The kinky gleaming heads of men seeming to be lifted up. And the rustling and the whispering ceased, and the children were quiet. Perhaps someone coughed, or the sound of a car horn, or a curse from the streets came in. Then Elisha hit the keys, beginning at once to sing. Everybody join him.
Precious Lord, take my hand and lead me on.
Baldwin's idea was that Christianity could expand and include more people, even whites. You notice in Go Tell It on the Mountain, the father believes that whites are irredeemable.
When the white man start giving us prizes, I've got to ask myself what it is they after. White man's been our torment for over 100 years. Anything he do, everything he tries, a way of beating us down, keeping us small. You don't believe me, do you?
How can I put this? The Baptist church, for example, in which I grew up, in all but actual fact, in all but actual vocabulary, assumed that the saved were black and all the doomed were white. It was a kind of fantasy revenge. And it was also, very importantly, a way of getting them from one day to another through their lives, and as it turns out, through generations. But, times do change.
Well, I was very excited about it, and I was pushing it in all directions, but it didn't get great reviews. It got nice reviews. They were okay, but not fantastic. The Times was disappointing, as I remember. That's the most important place to have a review, and hardly a dog barked, as they say in England, when the book came out. But it was, and it sold reasonably well, but of course later on it went on to sell millions in various paperback editions and be adopted at school courses and so on. But little Jimmy then didn't know that.
I hear Baldwin as a part of the continuity begun, if you will, for me anyway, with Frederick Douglass in 1849 in the slave narrative. I hear his voice. I hear Baldwin when I think of Jupiter Hammond, a slave in the 18th century. I hear Baldwin in the music, the lyric, really, of George Moses Horton, a black slave writing about 1840, 50. He wrote, "Alas, and was I born for this, to wear this slavish chain." I hear Baldwin.
After Go Tell It in the Mountain was published, he wrote me in January of 54 that he has a project and said, "It's a great departure for me, and it makes me rather nervous. It's not about Negroes, first of all. Its locale is the American colony in Paris. What is really delicate about it is that since I want to convey something about the kinds of American loneliness, I must use the most ordinary type of American I can find. The good, white Protestant is the image I want to use. This is precisely the kind of American about whose setting I know the least. Whether this will be enough to create a real human being, only time will tell. It's a love story, short, and wouldn't you know it, tragic. Our American boy comes to Europe, finds something, loses it, and in his acceptance of his loss, becomes, to my mind, heroic. It's called Deep Secret, One for My Baby. Well, it wasn't called One for My Baby, it was called Giovanni's Room, eventually. And he finished it and sent it to his agent, who gave it to Knopf. And wouldn't you know, I was on vacation when it came in, when the manuscript came in, and the two editors who had worked on Go Tell It read it, and I guess they were scared. They were scared about this. It was homosexuality was the theme, and that was not on the books in those days. There's very little written about homosexuality, certain very few novels. And they turned it down. When I got back from vacation, I was horrified, but it was gone by that time. It had gone back to the agent who was peddling it to somebody else.
Jimmy Baldwin was neither in the closet about his homosexuality, nor was he running around proclaiming, homosexuality. I mean, he was what he was, and you either had to buy that or, mea culpa, go somewhere else.
I think the trick is to say yes to life. I think that the tales, it's only we in 20th century, which is so obsessed with particularly the details of anybody's sex life. I don't think those details make any difference. And I will never be able to deny a certain power that I have had to deal with, which has dealt with me, which is called love. And love comes in very strange packages. I love a few men, I love a few women. And a few people have loved me, and I suppose that's all that saved my life.
Giovanni's Room had some pretty good reviews, and it sold probably better than Go Tell It originally. I remember there was one review by Nelson Algren, who's himself a magnificent novelist in The Nation, and he said at the end of it, this novel is more than another report on homosexuality. It is the story of a man who could not make up his mind, one who could not say yes to life. It is a glimpse into the special hell of Genet, that would be Jean Genet, the French homosexual writer, told with a driving intensity, its horror sustained all the way. That's good stuff.
You published Giovanni's Room very early on.
I finished the book in 55.
And that, to deal with homosexuality was difficult. And you already were dealing with, black writer.
Mm-hmm.
What made you decide to do that?
Well, one can say almost that I didn't have an awful lot of choice. Giovanni's Room comes out of something which tormented and frightened me, the question of my own sexuality. It also simplified my life in another way because it meant that I had no secrets. Nobody could blackmail me. You didn't tell me, I told you.
Jimmy Baldwin went to France to write. He tried to go somewhere where he was secluded and removed, and he liked France. More American artists need to be able to see the rest of the world as well as, participate in the social development of the United States because it broadens their perspective.
Well, the French left him alone and allowed him his space, his corner, and what he needed most. And when he returned, one could see the difference immediately. There was a difference in me also. I'd grown older, and he was a man, and I was a young man. We could now share something we hadn't before. We could drink together. We could sort of talk together, you know. You know, there was a vast amount of difference between the young man who left and the old man who returned. It has nothing to do with age. We became closer and closer, and perhaps it was that moment when two brothers could sit and talk to one another. And talk, you know, we talked about each other's lives and what we felt, what we believed in.
I met Jimmy in New York. I suspect it was the late 50s. He was going to some of the same literary parties that I was going to. And Bob Silvers, he buttonholed me at a party one day and said, well, Jimmy is in bad trouble financially. He's trying to write a book. He's really hard up. He has to support a lot of his family. I know you have a guest house up in Connecticut. Would it be a possibility maybe to take Jimmy in? He needs a place to write. Another Country was the book that Jimmy was writing at that time. He was suffering over it. He would come over here to this house from the guest house where he was working, and I think it may have been the first book, as I recollect, in which he said, I really in total command of what I'm trying to do.
There were times he'd come in and say, for instance, this person's not speaking to me today. I don't know what's the matter with him. I haven't done anything wrong. I'd say, well, stay with them, you know. Go ask them how they feel, how they're feeling. And, you know, we talked about his characters. Just the way I'm talking, you know, he'd ask me, come in and say, well, how are you feeling? I would ask about them that way, you know. How are they this morning? What are they doing? Have they left the bar yet? Are they still drinking themselves to death or whatever? Something like that, you know.
He labored all that winter. And I might say, with a great deal of conflict, because the subject was quite bold and really quite daring. It had to do with blacks and whites, with their relationships, intimate relationships. And maybe he felt that he was on uncertain ground. So Jimmy escaped the problem by going to Turkey, of all places, where he had been invited by a friend a Turkish actor whom he had met in New York.
There is something in this land. There is something ancient that Jimmy felt was as ancient as his African blood. It's silly to say that he felt he was near his roots, but he felt he was near some roots as valid as his. The old city, it reminded him of Harlem, I think. The people, the faces, the warmth, the smell, the crowd, the noise, you know, everything. He loved the book market. He reminded him of his childhood days, perhaps, in Harlem.
And when I was living in Istanbul, and I don't want to be romantic about poverty, because it's not pretty. Nevertheless, the Turks, the people I was dealing with, who had nothing, reminded me of the people I grew up with who had nothing, who would give you anything. Really, the shirt off their back, money, bread.
The first time I met Jimmy was in December of 1961. I was teaching at Robert College in Istanbul, and he was staying with his friends Engin Cesar and Guri Sururi. I went to a party at their place, and someone said, why don't you go into the kitchen to meet Jimmy? He wants to see what Americans in Istanbul are like. And then there was a lot of laughter about that. And I went in, and there was this rather astounding looking man sitting at a kitchen counter, and he made a kind of flourish with the pen on the paper, and he turned around and he said, "It's finished, baby." And those were the first words he said to me. And then I introduced myself and I said, "What's finished?" And he said, "Another country's finished." So he had just finished it the moment I walked into the room.
In this passage from Another Country, a white character in a taxi is riding through Harlem. He's talking about his best friend, a black friend, who has died, and he speaks of the black family's reaction to his presence. Quote, "I walked into that house and they were just sitting there, Ida and her mother and her father, and there were some other people there, relatives maybe, and friends. I don't know. No one really spoke to me, except Ida, and she really didn't say much. And they all looked at me as though, well, as though I had done it. And oh, I wanted so badly to take that girl into my arms and kiss that look off her face and make her know I didn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Whoever was doing it to me too." Another Country is about blacks and whites trying to connect, trying to respect each other, trying desperately to love each other.
If everyone had been in love, they treat their children differently. They treat each other differently.
Yes, well, but perhaps that is one of the points in Another Country, which it seems to me as much about love as about anything else.
It is about love.
It's more. It is
It's about the price of love, too.
Which is the price of life.
Yes, but people don't seem to realize that.
Much to Jimmy's surprise, Another Country turned out to be his most successful book yet. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for weeks and weeks. It was even translated into more than 24 languages. And that, of course, made Jimmy very happy. Most especially because it would make it possible for Yashar Kemal, his great friend, to read the book.
En çok sevdiğim kitabı tabii Another Country'ydi. Onun üzerinde uzun uzun konuştuk. Biz daha çok Jimmy ile roman teorileri üzerine konuşuyorduk. Mesela en çok konuştuğumuz yazar, iki yazar vardı. Biri Dostoyevski, biri Faulkner. İkimiz de seviyorduk Faulkner'i. Mesela Dostoyevski anlayışımız tamamen Dostoyevski niye seviyoruz? Yani filozofi olarak da ben seviyordum Dostoyevski. Jimmy de filozofi olarak seviyordu. İşte karanlığı yığıyor karanlığı bütün kitaplarında ama bir böyle kurşun geçmez bir karanlıklar yığıyor. Arkasından birdenbire bir ışık patlatıyor Dostoyevski.
Jimmy loved a good rousing discussion. I remember one time when he was living in this house, I said to him, "Why do you let so many people come into the house? Why do we spend so much time eating and drinking and staying up late when you're trying to write a novel?" And he said to me, "If I didn't live that way, I couldn't write the novel. If I lived a safe, quiet life, I wouldn't be living life. Therefore, you just have to put up with the people around and the noise and the drinking, the staying up late. But always, at the end of the evening, although one wondered how anybody could have worked at that point, he would sit up and write until, what shall I say, late in the morning."
it sort of was anyway a kind of place to rest and to work. But I couldn't live in Paris anymore. New York was impossible. And it was in some ways another way of life, another set of assumptions which are not mine, or not which I didn't grow up with because I'm not a Muslim, but which can teach you a great deal about your own set of assumptions, because they are, once you find yourself in another civilization, you're forced to examine your own.
Even though he may have been skeptical about the Kennedys, he felt that he really had to come back and be part of what was happening in America. It would have been just impossible for him to sit in France or Turkey while this very important movement was taking place in his own country.
When Dorothy Counts was spattered by the mob as she was trying to go to school, that was the day I decided I was coming home. And I came home, to see, to do whatever I could do. When I went south and I began to deal with a reality which had always been incipient in me but never been expressed or objectified, I fell in love with those people. And I was very happy to be South, even though it was very frightening. Something in me recognized it. Something in me had come home.
You live in, brother. He's not even teaching me about the future of my people. What you going to school for then, dummy? We don't even have a country. I know that. Do we have a country? He said the United States is your country, which is not your country. You have no flag, brother.
A boy last week, who was 16, told me on television. Thank God we got him to talk. Maybe somebody will start to listen. He said, I got no country, I've got no flag. Now, he's only 16 years old. And I couldn't say you do. I don't have any evidence to prove that he does.
He was the person who had initially, or one of the first people, to cry out what we were feeling and in fact, what we were going to feel and what we were going to do. He was one of the first to articulate it.
And in the moment you are born, since you don't know any better, every stick and stone and every face is white, and since you have not yet seen a mirror, you suppose that you are too. It comes as a great shock around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians were you. It comes as a great shock to discover that the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity, has not in its whole system of reality evolved any place for you.
In that time that he was here, that I first began to see that terrific, almost schizoid wrenching that he suffered, being pulled in one direction by the demands of his art, and the other direction by his moral need to do what he was also good at, which was to preach. That is, to preach the gospel of equality, to preach the gospel of revolution, if you want to call it that.
He once said that he left the pulpit in order to preach the gospel, and in a certain sense that's true. This was something he could do. You could say this was God's gift to him, and this is what he made use of.
He had begun to make notes for the work that later became The Fire Next Time while he was here, and discussed it with me, discussed the need to write an essay, a long polemical essay, to tell white Americans what it was like to be black.
Everything now, we must assume, is in our hands. We have no right to assume otherwise. If we, and now I mean the relatively conscious whites and the relatively conscious blacks, if we do not falter in our duty now, we may be able, handful that we are, to end the racial nightmare and change the history of the world. If we do not dare everything. The fulfillment of that prophecy, recreated from the Bible in songs by former slaves, is upon us. God gave Noah the rainbow sign. No more water, fire next time.
Did you have any idea that this was going to be a kind of live grenade tossed, at least into the white world?
It didn't occur to me at all. Isn't that funny? Not at all. I wrote it as a kind of, as I repeat, a kind of plea to black people and to white people about this country.
What he did was to write it in language that fairly educated white middle-class people could understand, and I think he led many of them to change their ways, to become more sympathetic to civil rights.
Many people, including myself, believe it's one of the great documents of the 20th century. He was becoming very distinctly one of the most, certainly, if not the most eloquent early spokesman for the black movement.
I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, that the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
And I think part of his disillusionment was that some of these people in New York weren't really liberals. I mean, blacks were the first ones to attack liberalism.
One of these liberal, well-intentioned people would say something like, well, you don't mean, Jimmy, that black people might, and he would interrupt and said, yes, baby, they're going to burn your house down.
It's up to you. As long as you think you're white, there's no hope for you. As long as you think you're white, I'm going to be forced to think I'm black.
We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Jimmy Baldwin was in the tradition. When people are always saying to me, for instance, why is your poetry, why is your play so political? But that's our tradition. You know, whether you're talking about Frederick Douglass or W.B. Du Bois or Zora Neale Hurston or, Toni Morrison or Alice Walker, that's our tradition. And why is our tradition? Because not only is it our tradition, even from Africa, to include society as the focus of art, you see, as its principal focus, the development of society, but as an oppressed people, we have no other choice but to fight.
Do you feel the Broadway stage is a good place to get across your views on the race relations question?
Well, yes. I don't want to get involved in a long discussion of the American theater. This is another story. But yes, I do. I'm very glad that we are opening on Broadway. I
hope it shakes up a few people.
Richard? Richard, I want to help you. I want to help you more than anything else in this world.
How?
Well, just like I used to. I won't let you go anywhere without me.
Boy, you're still determined to get your neck broke, huh?
Yes. Yes, well, it's neck-breaking time.
By the time Blues for Mr. Charlie came, black people were not going to the theater because there was nothing for them to go to the theater for. There was nothing they could identify with. And their culture was not being explored in the theater. So I think perhaps what Jimmy meant when he said there was no American theater, he meant there was no true American theater because the American theater as it was then did not reflect him and his culture.
Oh, morning, son. You up early? Sleep well?
Yeah, okay. Boy, where you off to looking so sharp? Looks like you might be going to meet the man.
Going down to the mayor's office. We're getting a biracial committee started.
Oh, Daddy. Why you knocking yourself out trying to have a cup of coffee with Mr. Charlie? He don't want you. What you want with him?
There's a whole lot more to it than that. If you stick around here long enough, you'll see what I mean.
Yeah, well, don't let me hold you up.
Need anything downtown, Mama?
Oh, no, thank you, son.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
How about you, son? Need anything? Like me to bring anything back for you?
Well, there are a lot of things I need, Daddy, but I ain't too sure you could bring them back.
Well, you certainly learned to be pretty insolent up north, didn't you? Well, you just forget all that, son. Start remembering you're back home. I'm still your father. Yeah, and I can still knock you down.
You're gonna be late, Daddy.
At least before the Civil Rights Movement, as long as they thought he was advocating a kind of, Dr. King nonviolence, that was okay. They could at least, admit him, to the edge of the pantheon marked colored. But once Blues Mr. Charlie came out, and he actually, that play is about class struggle. There's a Dr. King character, there's a Malcolm X character. They're struggling for influence over the students, which is real life, struggling for, SNCC and the Carmichaels and the Rap Browns.
The reason perhaps that Blues for Mr. Charlie was considered such a terrible thing, because this man spoke the truth. He spoke the truth. I mean, he didn't pretty it up. He didn't color it up. He spoke the truth the way it was, the way he saw it, the way he knew it. That's perhaps why he was called a propagandist by many. They just didn't want to deal with what he was saying.
I've been dreaming of that day ever since I left here. Dreaming of my mama falling down the steps at that white man's hotel.
Richard, she fell.
No, ma'am.
The stairs were wet and slippery, and she fell.
She was pushed.
She fell.
You saw the way they were always hanging around her, because she was pretty and black.
Now, Richard, you can't go through life believing that all the suffering in the world is caused by white people.
Yeah, I can't. Don't you tell me I can't. They are responsible for all the misery I've ever seen. That's good enough for me. It's because my daddy ain't got no power that my mama's dead, and my daddy ain't got no power because he's black. And the only way a black man is ever going to get any power is to drive all them white people right into the sea.
You're going to make yourself sick. You're going to make yourself sick with hatred.
I'm going to make myself well with hatred.
It can't be done.
Yeah.
It can never be done. Hatred is a poison, Richard.
Well, not for me, Grandmama. Mr. Baldwin, do you think you'll ever write anything that doesn't have a message? Assuming that there can be things written without a message.
I don't quite know what that means. In my view, no writer who ever lived could have written a line without a message. It depends on what you're asking me, I think, is to what extent do I intend to become a polemicist or a propagandist? Well, I can't answer that because the nature of our situation imposes on everybody involved in it things that wouldn't ordinarily do, and you take risks which you wouldn't ordinarily take. I don't think of myself as a public speaker or a civil rights leader or any of that, but I'm not about to sit in some tower someplace cultivating my talent.
It's not just a matter of letting go. These privileges are part of you. They're who you are. It's right here in your gut.
Then where's the point of all this struggling if Mr. Charlie can't change?
Who's Mr. Charlie?
You're Mr. Charlie Farnell. All white men, Mr. Charlie. It's a little something you don't understand. When you're a black man with a black son, you forget all about white people and everybody else and concentrate on trying to save your child. That's why I let Richard go north. Well, I failed. Yeah, Lyle just walked him up the road and killed him.
We don't know that Lyle killed him, and Lyle denies
What do you mean we don't know Lyle killed him?
I mean, we don't know. We can just say it looks that way, but meridian circumstantial evidence can be a very tricky thing.
When it involves a white man killing a black man.
The resolution of that play where he says, you know, the preacher takes the gun. This is the King character, and takes the gun and puts it in the pulpit and says, well, I got the Bible and the gun. One of these is going to work. You see, that's another step forward, and I think his writings since then, you know, demonstrated his coming to grips more and more clearly as an artist and as, you know, a thinking human being and as an activist.
That's why a play like Blues for Mr. Charlie was not, too much attention was not, it was frightening. It was frightening to see these things.
My mama's afraid I'm pregnant. My mama's afraid of so much, but I'm not afraid. Oh, no, no, no, I hope I am pregnant. Yes, I hope I am. One more illegitimate black baby. That's right, you jive mothers. And I am going to raise my baby to be a man, do you hear me? Oh, you let me be pregnant. You let me be pregnant. Don't let it all be gone. Oh, Juanita. Juanita, you are going crazy. Lord, don't you let me go mad. You let me be pregnant. Let me be pregnant.
We don't teach you to turn the other cheek. We don't teach you to turn the other cheek in the South, and we don't teach you to turn the other cheek in the North. We teach you to obey the law. We teach you to carry yourselves in a respectable way. But at the same time, we teach you that anyone who puts his hand on you, do your best to see that he doesn't put it on anybody else.
Something happened to Jimmy when that assassination took place. It was a long line of horrendous American assassinations.
I mean, they're killing my friends. It's as simple as that. And have been all the years that I've been alive. For no reasons which, you know, which have any validity.
By the time we got to the mid-60s, by the time things started to explode, a lot of criticism of Baldwin came. Many of the people who were exploding had not read Jimmy Baldwin, and consequently were very susceptible to the strong criticism that was clearly articulated in Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice. Many of us equated the Black Revolution with our manhood, with militancy and masculinity. And here was Eldridge Cleaver saying that Jimmy Baldwin hated his blackness and hated his masculinity.
And we've got to have enough self-respect to lay down our lives and to pick up the gun.
Jimmy became a pariah. Cleaver was representative of a raging and quite logical hatred on the part of blacks for whites.
There are days, this is one of them, when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it.
Jimmy was split by a desire for love and of communion on the one hand, and on the other by a kind of understanding that as long as the system existed as it did in this country, there could be no such getting together. This sounds like a paradox, but he loathed violence. And that is why he could never truly join the militants who rose in the 1960s.
Not that you're willing to die, but that you're willing to kill for your freedom.
It is not a romantic matter. It is the unutterable truth All men are brothers. That's the bottom line. If you can't take it from there, you can't take it at all. Love has never been a popular movement, and no one's ever wanted really to be free. The world is held together, really it is held together, by the love and the passion of very few people.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will.
Here's a letter Jimmy is writing from New York, dated 12th of April, 1968. Dear brother, between 2 and 3 weeks ago, I had to fly from Hollywood to New York to do a benefit with Martin at Carnegie Hall. I did not have a suit and had one fitted for me that afternoon. I wore the same suit at his funeral. What can I say to you, my dear? Medgar, Malcolm, Martin, murdered. I really cannot talk. And yet I must. Pray to those gods who are not Western, who are not Christian, for our lives, for your brother's life. I can't write any more now. Please understand. My love will never change. Your brother, Jimmy.
Jimmy had moments when he came back from America when he was very depressed. Because he lived in a very intense way there. He hadn't been in good health for a while. His heart had gone off. And they had to give him very serious treatments. He came to the south of France and he spent months here getting that together. And one day he said, look, I'm going to buy this house. He said that if it hadn't been for this place, he wouldn't be alive.
This village, in a way, in a big way, saved his life, you know. They looked after him. They protected him in a way in which he couldn't be protected in America, let's say. He finally had found a place where he could work. You know, he found a place where he could sit and felt as comfortable in a home. Because to live that long, it takes you that long just to land. You find yourself moving around the world. You're riding on planes, you're riding in apartments, you're riding here and you're riding there, and then finally you find a place where you can come and write and live and have friends, you know.
Jimmy came here to my house a great deal for lunch and for dinner sometimes, and I went to his house for dinner. His birthday party was always a great event for the entire south of France, it seemed. And we often had lunch at the Colombe d'Or, which is like a family place for Jimmy. He'd sit there for hours, not just with me, but with all of his friends. Simone Signoret and her husband, Yves Montand, and Nina Simone and Miles Davis, whoever was passing through. He loved long philosophical discussions. We talked about the churches a lot in Harlem, and the music in the churches. And sometimes we'd be full of red wine and sit down at the piano, and I'd knock out those songs, and David and Jimmy and I, and Bernard, would sing Hide Me in Thy Bosom, or Have a Little Talk with Jesus, you see.
And we'll tell them all about our trouble. Hear our favorite cry. Our favorite cry. Is it feeble or favorite? It's feeble, you're right. Hear our feeble cry. Answer by and by. Feel the prayer will turn in. Feel the fire burning. Just a talk with Jesus makes it right. What else now?
Oh my goodness, let's see. There was one you would think of. You were way back. You and Jimmy went way back.
I like that. I'm singing in my soul, I'm singing in my soul, when those trumpets roll. I sing from morn to night, it makes my spirit right. I'm singing a song, oh, I like that one.
I'm not really in America a private person. No, I'm a public person. A public person cannot write. Writers always had to find, I'm not the only case, not the most, even the most spectacular. You have to find a way to do your work. Because if you don't do your work, then you really are useless.
You do spend a long time between novels. Why is that?
I'm that kind of writer. There's no answer to that. You know, everybody works the way he can work. I must point out, though, too, that I've been working the last few years between assassinations. That doesn't make it any easier either.
He was working on If Beale Street Could Talk. And it was the first novel he had written since America. And that bothered him very much.
It's a book that stands out from the other books. It's a very bitter book. And I think that's because he'd been disillusioned by what happened in the 60s. By the assassination of Malcolm X, the assassination of Martin Luther King. It's a very desperate period, and sort of like I would call it a post-revolutionary novel in which all the injustices remain, police brutality, and you almost feel as if the characters in that book are stalked, like animals, like game.
I had certainly seen him before that particular afternoon, but he'd been just another cop. After that afternoon, he had red hair and blue eyes. He was somewhere in his 30s. He walked the way John Wayne walks, striding out to clean up the universe. And he believed all that. Like his heroes, he was kind of pin-headed, heavy-gutted, big-assed, and his eyes were as blank as George Washington's eyes. But I was beginning to learn something about the blankness of those eyes. What I was learning was beginning to frighten me to death. If you look steadily into that unblinking blue, into that pinpoint at the center of the eye, you discover a bottomless cruelty, a viciousness cold and icy. In that eye, if you do not exist, you are lucky.
People say Jimmy grew bitter. Put it this way to you. You cannot go to a page and describe a human being in love or a human being's pain if you're bitter.
Bitterness is like cancer. It eats upon the host. Jimmy was not bitter. What Jimmy was angry. He was constant. He was angry at injustice, at ignorance, at exploitation, at stupidity, at vulgarity. Yes, he was angry.
What is it you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It has taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, my nieces and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress?
Jimmy wouldn't let people off the hook, and some people are bothered by that. And one way of handling the problem is to say, oh, his powers have slipped, you know.
It's too bad that the public has to regard a writer of Jimmy's value and worth and contributions as somebody who was in and out of vogue. I don't think somebody who fought for human rights and dignity the way Jimmy did should be like last year's bow tie or this year's straw hat.
What people tend to forget is that Jimmy spent a large part of his later years teaching as well as writing. He lectured all over the country. He taught for several years in Amherst. And this was very important to him.
I thought he was a marvelous teacher and very invested and really cared that he was getting through to the students and that there was that connection, that there was a dialogue going on. One of the reasons that I think he decided to teach is that he wanted to be around young people who are getting the basis for their ideas, and he was interested in what they were thinking.
Well, I was fortunate. My whole senior year, I got to spend basically on James Baldwin's knee. He would give us assignments, we would do writing, and then we would come in and read to each other. Because Jimmy was so busy, because he was on the road while he was teaching the course, he would always take the class out for drinks afterwards, because this is how he could get to know his students. We hung out and, you know, we laughed, and that's how our friendship started.
He liked reading the students' work. He liked budding creativity, really liked being around it. And he liked the fact that the students looked up to him for guidance and that they asked real, intelligent, well-informed questions about how did you do that? How do I do it?
One of my problems going to Mount Holyoke and going to such a staid college was that they always complained that I wrote in Black English, and first they would complain that you're writing in Black English. And then I'd say, well, I speak Black English, and I speak, you know, and they say, well, okay, if you're gonna write in Black English, you gotta just write in Black English. You can't mix it with regular old American language. And, you know, so those are the kind of battles I was fighting until Jimmy came along. And Jimmy said, write whatever you want to write. And, you know, not only write what you want to write, but this is my experience too. You know, this is real. I can relate to this.
Black people need witnesses in this hostile world which thinks everything is white.
Are you still in despair about the world?
I never have been in despair about the world. I'm enraged by it.
Enraged, all right.
But I don't think I'm in despair. I can't afford despair. I can't tell my nephew, my niece, you can't tell the children there's no hope.
Most people would agree that Jimmy was a hero in a sense, that Jimmy was an adventurer. Jimmy didn't take the easy way. There were people who would have liked him to go on writing Go Tell It on the Mountain over and over again. But Jimmy didn't like going back to what he had already done. Now, it may be that in any given novel, he wasn't as successful as he was in some other given novel, but that's the game. That's the game of writing novels. It's not an easy game. The things he attempted in the later works were much more difficult, I think.
You know, James Baldwin gave black people an example. I know he inspired me to write. When you see another black person out there writing, when all you've been fed is Milton and Shelley and all these people who were dead 200 years ago, that gets your attention.
God knows the handicaps and the hazards that are very, very, very real and tremendous. But if we can get beyond the places where we are now, something very important may happen in the world. I believe that.
He brought that cry into the cocktail parties, as well as the universities, as well as the streets, you know, and I think that all of us, owe James Baldwin, those of us who are interested in black liberation, those of us who are interested in human progress, and those of us interested in writing, owe him a great debt.
On the 1st of April, Jimmy had an appointment at the Institut Zank, which is a private hospital, and they gave him an examination and found out that it was cancer. He said the doctors had told him it was very, very serious, and he knew it was very, very serious. But he had things to do. He would say, I'm skating on my reputation now. I've got to do something else. He wanted to finish a play that he was rewriting a play, The Welcome Table, and he wanted to get that done. He knew himself that it wasn't going to be as long as I thought it would be, because he gave up his novel. He read the first 6 pages of his new novel to me. Then he gave that up.
The last letter I got from him, he wrote on July 4th. And he said to me, July 4th, exclamation mark, 87, my dear Cindy, a note, forcing myself to attempt to write by hand in an attempt to counter arthritis. Of course, he doesn't mention the operation at all. I suppose, in fact, that much of what I'm doing these days is an attempt to keep the lines of communication open. I seem to be, anyway, as the church members always put it, clothed and in my right mind. But everything seems very strange and tentative. The way of time is different. It goes fast, much more slowly. It is gone, suddenly the day, which had seemed so slow and heavy. And then there's the night, where I've always been more at home. I seem to curl up in the stillness at the center of the dark. I listen, and something is listening to me. All journeys are extraordinary, but one's got to make many, perhaps, in order to find this out. What a marvelous phrase, to find out.
Well, we never mentioned that he was going to die. He was quiet, reading, eating, little, not much. Sweet, as always, very, very nice. No complaint, nothing.
The last place he came when he was very sick was here, and had salami and bread and butter, cheese. And he was, at the time he was very sick, but he'd gotten up. He wanted to go out. He said, I want to go see Yvonne. And said, okay. So we brought him here. And they sat there and I left him alone.
He said one morning, he said, I see Simon's face on the wall. Do you ever see people's faces on the wall? He said, I see her face on the wall. And I called the doctor, and the doctor said, I think he's going to go tonight. And he couldn't swallow anymore. So I was trying to find a bent straw so he could pull it in. He didn't have the strength to pull it in the straw.
And in the evening, I went out of the room, told David to come help me take Jimmy. And we stayed there. David felt it was the last hour. Yes, it was amazing. We were the three of us sitting. David was holding his hand, and I was sitting on a chair in the beginning, and Bernard was putting water on his lips. David talked to him. We felt he looked at us. He didn't talk. He looked at us, and I have the feeling we accompanied him, you know, a part of his trip. And Jimmy looked, little by little, looked elsewhere, and as I told you, we accompanied him. Then, personally, I had the feeling at one point I came back to life. He was gone. That was it. Jimmy had gone.
Everybody who came into contact with Jimmy had his or her life changed, I think. And that's the mark of a real teacher. It's the mark of a real preacher. And it's the mark of a prophet. And I think Jimmy was in many ways a prophet.
He said, I pray I've done my work so that when I've gone from here and all the turmoil through the wreckage and rumble and through whatever, when someone finds themselves digging through the ruins, he said, I pray that somewhere in that wreckage, you'll find me.
somewhere in that wreckage that they can use something that I left behind. And if I've done that, then I've accomplished something in life.
A day will come when you will trust you more than you do now. When you trust me more than you do now. We can trust each other. I do believe, I really do believe in the New Jerusalem. I really do believe that we can all become better than we are. I know we can. But the price is enormous, and people are not yet willing to pay it. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm worn through the storm, through the night. Lead me on to the light. Precious Lord, take my hand and lead me on. Precious Lord, take my hand and lead me on.
We'll do a little Q&A. If you'd like to ask Karen and Doug any questions, we'll do so at this time.
Why don't you come sit with us?
Okay.
Oh my. Yes. That was in Roxbury. William Styron lived in Roxbury, and his guest house was where Jimmy spent a lot of his time writing in other countries. So I believe it's a little bit south of here. Yes. I first encountered James Baldwin as a reader when I was in college, and I read Notes of a Native Son. I'd just come back from my own junior year abroad, and here was this incredible writer who was writing about his time in France and his own struggles with his ideas, his thoughts about his own American citizenship, what his country was doing, and I was doing the same thing only a few decades later. I was wondering about my own identity, and I was not happy with my country and what had gone on in Vietnam and back home and how the world was relating to. I tried to pretend for a while that I wasn't American, but that didn't work too well. Anyway, he was an extraordinary writer. I'd always wanted to be a writer, and so I started reading a little bit of Baldwin over the years. But what I really did was become a journalist, a screenwriter, and then I went to work with Cinema Verite filmmakers called the Maysles brothers. They were Albert and David Maysles. They were known for when you make a film that is supposedly cinema verite, it's cinema truth. You go around the world and follow someone. You pick someone who's a good storyteller, basically, and it helps if they're famous. And then you film a lot of film, and you hope that something happens, and you expect that it will, and eventually a story will be there, because human beings, especially good storytellers, are great subjects for a film. And so the idea came up, James Baldwin, and I remembered the reading. I remembered how, years before in college, he had really struck me, and I wondered what had happened to him. And at this time, this was now 1986, beginning of 1986. And he was very much out of favor. You saw the criticisms. People were just kind of tired of what it seemed like Johnny One Note, and nobody really knew where he was. Turned out he was teaching, as we found out, as you saw. And so I found him up at UMass. He was a college professor. And he and I first corresponded by fax, and then by phone, and then we met in New York City, and we had lunch. And it turned out that he, since his youth, really, he'd been fascinated by films. He'd had an intern teacher back when he was about 10 years old, who took him under her wing and took him to see plays and movies, and he was just fascinated. He later wrote that he'd love to have a camera of his own and make experimental films. And he'd had some experience with making some forays into cinema verite, but it never was quite what he wanted. So he was willing to talk to me, because I was suggesting that he collaborate, that he really work with us on a film of his making, but I would help him. And the Maysles brothers, who were famous, they'd made Grey Gardens, Gimme Shelter, a whole bunch of really well-known award-winning films. And so we decided what he was doing at the time, his writing another book. It was to be called Remember This House, and it was about to be his, what he really wanted to do was write something that paid tribute to his friends, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers, who'd all died. And he'd known not just these men, they were not just his friends, he knew their families, he knew their kids. So the idea that we came up with together was to follow him going through the South, revisiting the families now that the fathers were gone, and that he would spend time with 3 kids, the son of Martin Luther King, the son of Medgar Evers, and the daughter of Malcolm X, and that we would film them together. But he wanted to ask them one question on camera, first of all. And the first question that he came up with was, because he was so concerned with progress, and he cared so much about young people, and remember, he was a teacher now. And so the question he wanted to ask them was it worth it that your father was assassinated? Well, we decided that that was a pretty heavy question, but we could do that, and we wanted very much to see what they had to say and to bring that to the world on a screen. But he never got to do that. We never got to film any of the footage that we had planned, he and I together. He went back to France, and as you heard, he was starting to feel increasingly ill. The last time I spoke to him was in September of 1987. And he said, "Oh, Karen," I'd spoken to him a whole bunch of times before that, but this was the last phone call. He said, "Karen, I know why you're calling, and don't worry, we'll be filming by the end of the year." Well, we were, but we were filming his funeral. He died on December 1st, 1987, and a friend of mine who worked with me at the Maysles Film Company called me up at 7 in the morning. She said, Karen, did you hear? I just heard on NPR, James Baldwin died in France last night." And that was a total shock because I really had believed that he was somehow ill but getting better. And it took 8 days for the body to be brought back from France. And then we filmed the funeral and then persuaded our funders that this was worth doing. It's a longer story, but basically to answer your actual question, how long did this take? All of that time, up until our working together, then the 2 years of collaborating on a film we never got to make, from the time that he died until the film was released on his 65th birthday in 1989, it was 18 months. And during that time, we filmed on 3 continents. We filmed archival footage of our own that we kind of turned sepia and intercut it with other real archival footage. But the main thing is that we discovered initially when we thought, well, okay, what we need to do now that he's gone, you can't make cinema verite film. Well, maybe we could make a film of people reading, famous people reading from his work, or we can intercut that with photographs of him sitting hunched over a typewriter. We didn't know what was out there because he was not being taught. He was so passé. And then we began it started just coming flying in the window. We hired researchers, but we were astounded to find all of the footage that you saw of him, not just on talk shows where he was invited, but where people had been so entranced by reading something of his that they'd borrowed a camera and driven from Germany down to the south of France, or gone to the village in Switzerland, or followed him around in the States, watched him eating lunch, whatever. And so there was all this amazing footage. And that's what we did with it. I will add one thing, just because I think it's really, really important. When I was going through all the hundreds of hours of archival footage that we did find, which is now in a collection at the Schomburg Institute for Research in Black Culture in Harlem, all of that footage, the clip that stood out for me the most, because it took me back, because it hadn't occurred to me, was where he says, as long as you insist on thinking you're white, I'm going to be forced to think I'm black. And that was a life changer for me, because I realized that I hadn't gotten to that place where he wanted us all to get to. And so I think we're still working on that, right? Oh, thank you, Doug. Doug, co-producer. I also, we got married after the film was made. Bill Miles was the third leg of our triangle, because after Jimmy died, we needed to have a collaborator who understood James Baldwin, and Bill Miles was someone who stood out because he had filmed Jimmy himself while he was still alive for a film that he made called I Remember Harlem. And the extraordinary story about Bill Miles is that he grew up just across the street from the back door of the Apollo Theater in Harlem. And he used to sneak in the back door and go up to the projection booth and made friends with the projectionist. And he fell in love with film. A little bit different method, but he fell in love with film the way James Baldwin fell in love with film. And he went on to actually, he was in World War II. When he got out of the military, he got a job with a film house, and he was basically the lowest of the low positions. He was adding filler to sound reels, and he would hold it up to the light sometimes, and before you had to space out sound so that images, and it's the way film works. But he'd hold this filler up to the light, and he happened to recognize some images of Harlem. And astonishingly, these were pieces of film that had been treated like trash and were being cut up to use as, just the silent parts. And instead, he started pocketing them. And over a period of actual years, he saved up and found enough footage of Harlem to make a 4-hour series for PBS called I Remember Harlem, in which James Baldwin appeared briefly. And so Bill just seemed like the perfect person to help us. And we had a wonderful time traveling and doing this together. Bill, unfortunately, is gone. He passed in 2013. But you saw his name on the screen. Yes? His family story is complicated in that his mother was born in Maryland, as he says, and he says his father was born in New Orleans. Well, in fact, that was his stepfather. His mother came up from Deal Island on the eastern shore of Maryland to New York, and she was pregnant. And the man who fathered Jimmy is not known to the world. It was a love story, and it had I'd say a tragic end. But what happened was she came to Harlem. Baldwin is his mother's name. She came to Harlem and she met Reverend Baldwin, who became Jimmy's stepfather, who took James Baldwin in, adopted him, and then there were 8 more kids that followed. This father was not the most positive force in the kids' lives, because even though he was a pastor and worked hard to try and support his family, he gradually he had mental illness and very serious diabetes, and finally died when Jimmy turned 19. And he writes about that in his autobiographical notes, in Notes of a Native Son. And he loved his siblings, and it's really interesting to me that in almost all of the interviews that we went through on camera, he never called his stepfather. He said, my father. So I want to respect that too and say that I believe it's in part because he cared so much about his siblings, and he wanted to give them the respect that they all are part of the same energy. And David Baldwin, the one who's featured on screen, was one of the closest friends of his entire life, and they remained that way. So, yes, I know there was a question here. Did you still want to ask it? Right. He lived on there for another 10 years in the farmhouse in the south of France. Then he died. And then there were a lot of legal struggles over the house. And I went back there in 2014, and a developer the family had tried very hard to keep hold of the house, but there were legal disputes and the family lost. So the house was passed to a developer who instantly, in the dead of night, literally took a bulldozer to the wing of the house where Jimmy's studio was. And so when I went in 2014, I saw that they'd gotten rid of the part that mattered the most, historically, perhaps, but the whole house was beautiful, and people wanted to turn it into a writer's retreat. But it's now completely torn down, and condos are being built, and it has a gorgeous view out over the hillsides of below Saint-Paul-de-Vence, looking out toward the Mediterranean. You can see the sea in the distance. It's quite an extraordinary place. It was a 17th century farmhouse that was originally owned by an Algerian woman, what the French call a pied noir, who is a Blackfoot, a white French woman whose family had been part of colonial French Empire, lived in Algeria, and then when the Algerian War came, she and her kind were ousted and came back to France. So she was a very conservative, very nationalistic, very flag-waving French woman. And she and Jimmy, she was his landlady for quite some time before he bought the house. They'd have these terrific debates and loved each other deeply and came around to finding common ground. And this is to me, it's such a great example of what Jimmy was like. So in the last few years of his life, the farm woman, Jeanne Faure, and she was actually a descendant from one of the presidents of France, Félix Faure. So she was a woman of substance, but of such hardline views. And she named him. There's a tradition in France when someone dies that the family has a procession in front of the casket through the village. And the person who leads that procession is the most important to the family. She invited James Baldwin to lead the procession by her side. And then in the last year of his life, he was given the Legion of Honor, which is one of the highest awards that can be given by the French government. And he invited her to go to Paris with him, so she accepted the Legion of Honor by his side. I don't. Yes. Yes. Isn't it amazing? I'm still honored by their participation. It really came together because, first of all, I was working with Jimmy and with his brother David while they were both alive, and we had a different film project. And so I knew something about their lives and whom their friends were. But then David Leeming, who was busy writing a biography about Jimmy, at the time, we knew how much he knew, so we asked his advice, and he just said, well, his closest friends are so-and-so and so-and-so. And then we tried to get to balance the film, because in the documentary film world, what you call, and it's not a positive term, a hagiography is a film that is too much in love with the subject and praises the person you're trying to portray. So we wanted to invite some of Jimmy's critics as well, and Amiri Baraka and Ishmael Reed, two of the writers on screen, had written quite critically about James Baldwin. And when we interviewed them, we expected some of the similar material to come out of their mouths, and it was just all positive. And after we finally shut down the camera, he said, well, what happened? What made you speak about him that way when you've written this and this and this? And they basically explained that, look, what you do while someone's alive is try to keep each other honest. But once they're gone, you appreciate, you celebrate the legacy. So that was part of what we went through. So one story about Dr. Angelo, I think, is worth telling, because we first filmed her in a hotel in New York because she was coming through, and that's when she was available. Basically, we made ourselves whatever was convenient for them to help them agree to be on camera. And I had just read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which is a wonderful, wonderful book of hers, and one that actually Jimmy encouraged her to write. And so I come into the room, and there she is, and, oh, Maya. And she says, my dear, you will call me Dr. Angelo. I worked very hard for this degree, and thank you very much. I thought I'd blown the whole thing. But then she settled right in and was just as lovely and as you saw. But then later, the original idea that we'd had for the film, which was to have some famous people read from his works, had been forgotten because there was so much footage of Jimmy. He realized he could tell his own story. And so we forgot about the books. I mean, we mentioned them because people mentioned them, but we didn't have any reading aloud. Nobody knew what his writing was like. So our executive producer at American Masters, one of our funders, said, oh, you did talk about filming some of his works being read out loud. What happened to that? So then I called my Dr. Angelo again and said, we need to do this for the film. Would you be willing? And her schedule, she was just always on the go, in demand, and very public figure. But she said, you know what? You're calling, it was January when we called her. And she said, February, I know one weekend I'm going to be free, and that's President's Day weekend. Nobody hires me on President's Day. And she said, I am planning to have some people over, but come on down. fly down and we'll find time. So we flew down to North Carolina where she was, and when I arrived there, she was stirring this huge, huge pot of extraordinarily wonderfully smelling stuff. And I had a suitcase full of books, and I'd marked different pages, and I said, you know, see what you think, which of these passages you might want to read. And she was kind of sweat pouring down over the hot stove, and I thought, well, this is the way it's going to be. And then she said, okay, and she finished her stuff in the kitchen. She went off, she disappeared. We set up the camera. She came back with this extraordinary turban on, just looking as beautiful as you saw her. And she said, by the way, I've edited a few of the passages, but I know which ones I'm going to read edited. She said, Jimmy won't mind. I've taken out the swears. So she read, and read, of course, as you heard, extraordinarily. But it was just an amazing collaboration, an amazing privilege. The one person whom I most regret we didn't include was one of the people who spoke at his funeral, and you don't see her on camera because she asked me not to include her, and that was Toni Morrison. And I regret to this day that she said, please, Karen, no, I hate myself on camera. I can't stand the way I sound. I'm not good at that. That's not my skill. And I listened to her. I should have persuaded her somehow, but.
We do have another question. The lady, yeah, right there.
Yes. That's how we met. We started with the Ridgefield Film Festival, where Jacques and Dan Morrison's wonderful film about John Brown was one of the films that was being presented. And so that was really early in the year. The centennial began with the screenings at the Film Forum of this film in New York City, and that was January. We have been on the go ever since. And a centennial, oddly, is a 2-year affair because Jimmy was born in 1924, so this is 100 years since his birth, but he won't even be 100 until next year when he turns 100 years after turning 1. It takes you a whole, so there's a second year. So you can check out our website, jamesbaldwinproject.org, and see where we've been, see where we're going, and I'm really pleased to be here. This place is so special, and I didn't mention. Oh, okay, one more question. Okay, yes, sir. Sounds like Jimmy. I have a contract that. how extraordinary. Please don't leave. I'd love to talk to you more, but this takes me back to the question about his family, and love really was what he believed in, not the saccharine, soupy kind of love, but our ability to find what we share with each other and what we have experienced in our lifetime as human beings, and that is so much more powerful. And within that, there is love, there is pain, there's everything he got from his early readings of Dostoevsky and Dickens. He said, you know, it was a good thing that I read all that before the world got to him, because I understood what I shared with people more than I understood what separated us. And so love me, love me, love me. I know that he wrote that intensely, but he also was writing about music, which, as you know, your own organization, Culture for a Cause, talks about through music and the arts. And that music was an extraordinarily important part of James Baldwin's life. And a lot of the writings, a lot of his books have musicians as characters and songs, song lyrics, and so on. Yes? He read them aloud. Well, as his biographer says, also the rhythms of the Bible, the language of the Bible, a lot of the call and response of the Bible, the repetition, it's definitely there. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Well, for me, wanting to be a wannabe writer, that's how he got me initially. But you said he never left you, and I know that there are times when I was off thinking about other stuff, but basically he affected my life to the point that this is what we're doing now, because it seems that we need his thought, his art, his understanding, his love more than ever. And I just wanted to mention Ayana. Anaya, I'm sorry, I was trying to get it right, whose art is out in the lobby and who's part of this experience. And you didn't, when you were up here, you spoke eloquently, but you didn't mention your organization, which is Just Creatives, which I don't know that it should be just, but Creatives, this is part of what James Baldwin did. He had this urge to create. He used every bit of his being for nonfiction and fiction. And I don't know. I'd love to ask you because you haven't seen the film before, perhaps you have something to say.
Yes, this is a little impromptu, but this is my first time seeing the film, and you did mention a little bit about my organization, Just Creatives, an online platform for creatives in the tri-state area and in the nation at large. But, and just to shout out my partner, Brendan Hammond, in the back here. He's also part of Just Creatives. Thank you guys for having us again. But it's so important. Seeing this film, I feel like from an artist's perspective, seeing what it takes to find all of this archival energy, the conversations, having that come alive again for people to see, that's so important now more than ever, I feel. That's just my opinion, but it's important to connect with other people. As you did say, there's film makers and writers and actors, and I'm sure more and more different respects of art and creativity in those ways. So with Just Creatives, we are somewhere to highlight those creators, the people that are not necessarily saying that, hey, I'm an artist and this is exactly what I do, but maybe they're not in a specific discipline, but they know that in their heart there is something that they're here to create. They're here to connect with others and network with people and share the information that they know. So films like this can happen. So writing can reach different parts of the world. So a gardener's work can transform what landscape looks like in the next 20 years. Who knows what all these different connections can make. So Just Creatives is an developing community of creatives online and in person, and building that gap between what's in real life in person versus what we've seen, and how we can bring those things together to inform others and help to make the world a creative place. So thank you for having us, and I really enjoyed the film. Thank you again.
I will add one more thing. I think maybe you said Jimmy was in the room. One thing that happened when we were showing the rough cut at the Schomburg Institute, the research library in Harlem. This is back in 1989, before the film was actually completed, but we had everything except the credits. And so that long list of credits at the end was not there, and there was a lot of black screen. But James Baldwin, whose voice can be heard singing, "Oh Precious Lord, Take My Hand," he sings it a cappella, and we had some piano music put to it. We had that song intentionally laid into the soundtrack already because it was going to be under the credits. And so we're showing it, and everybody, the Baldwin family was all there, including Bertus Baldwin. And I had talked to her beforehand and said, I hope you like what you see. But of course we were nervous. And then we get to the end of the screening, and instead of seeing the words on the screen for the credits, it was the black screen, and Jimmy's voice started singing. And then we hear this voice start keening, really crying, wailing from the front row, and I knew who was sitting there, and it was Jimmy's mother. And so Bill, Miles, and Doug, and I, and people from our film crew who were there looked at each other, and we didn't know what to do. Do you turn it off because somebody's crying, or do you let it keep going? We finally decided to let it go. And so his voice filled this black theater with this woman voicing her pain, her loss. And afterwards I went up to her and kneeled in front of her and said, I'm so sorry, I wasn't sure what to do. And she stopped me and she said, Jimmy was in the room. So his family, his mother is the one who taught him to love like that, and who encouraged him to reach out to difference and to embrace it and find what he had in common. And this is part of why none of the people who knew him intimately would admit to the people who called him bitter. He wasn't bitter, but he sure was, and had good cause to be angry. And he never lost hope. You can't tell the children there's no hope, as he said. I'll add one more quote that I like a lot of his, which also is related to the idea of hope, which is that he said this back in 1979 during an interview. If you change the way someone sees reality, even by a millimeter, then you can change reality. So that's I think we've been given an assignment. This is for our own good. He never wanted to say there was a black problem or a white problem. It was our problem, and this is what we need to work on. So help people see reality in a slightly different and perhaps more open way.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you, Doug. And we appreciate what you've done. Okay, but we do have to be, yeah, because we appreciate the host here, and they want to kind of wrap it up and get home. But we hope that Karen and Doug have helped us clear away the wreckage. I think we see the importance of these works and these collaborations going forward in the environment in which we now exist. And linking arms together in this particular time, going forward with a purpose, with a vision, is not only necessary, but it's necessary. But through art, through music, we can have that message sent to the masses of who we are and what we're really all about. And I hope through this film tonight, we can leave this place knowing that we have the power to instill those changes in our communities. So let's go forward with positivity, with the vision, and with that hope, and hopefully the peace that comes from that hope that we can share with others. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you very soon with another Culture for a Cause initiative. Thank you very much.